Two things happened in Millbrook Hollow that night. A boy vanished. 40 minutes later, a bell no one had touched began to ring. Nobody connected them. Not the sheriff. Not the boy's mother, pacing her kitchen with a phone pressed to her ear. Not Walt Kessler, the church sexton, frozen at the base of the tower stairs, flashlight shaking, listening to a rope swing in an empty room above him. For rings, then silence. By morning, everyone would know Beau Tanner was missing. By the following week, they'd know Priya Shah was too. And by the time Sheriff Renata Cole finally climbed those tower stairs herself, she'd find something stranger than any legend, and someone who'd been standing in plain sight the whole time. This is what really happened in Millbrook Hollow. It's worse than the story everyone already believed. Millbrook Hollow is small, 1,100 people, tucked into the Appalachian foothills. St. Aldrich's Church sits dead center. Its white steeple is the first thing you see driving in, the last thing you see driving out. Everyone learns the rule early. After sunset, you don't go near the bell. If it rings on its own, you go home. You lock the door. You don't look back at the steeple. Nobody wrote it down. Nobody needed to. Newcomers noticed it fast. They'd ask around, half joking. They'd get careful answers instead. A shrug, a change of subject. Not hostility, something closer to reverence. Clara Doyle grew up 2 houses from that steeple. She rolled her eyes at the rule as a teenager. She still locked her door at dusk anyway. Everyone did. It traced back to 1971. A teenager named Curtis Ambrose walked toward that church one October night and never walked back. No body, no suspect. Just a bell that rang twice that evening, and 3 witnesses who swore nobody had touched the rope. Curtis was Walt's cousin. Walt had been 12. He took the sexton job decades later anyway. The only man willing to spend his mornings inside a building half the county was quietly afraid of. One more detail, nobody thought twice about that fall. A quiet man named Terrence Voss doing odd jobs around the property. Patching gutters, clearing brush, hauling supplies for Walt. He'd grown up in Millbrook Hollow, left for 20 years, come back after some things in his life fell apart. Nobody asked what things. He was the kind of man who blended into a town the way paint blends into a wall. Nobody thought to remember his face. That would matter later. Beau Tanner was 17. A linebacker with a gentle streak, he hid behind a locker room grin. He never told his mother the bell rule still got under his skin sometimes. Even at 17, even after 4 years of varsity ball, had supposedly made him fearless. He liked Priya Shah. He hadn't told her that either. Priya was 16, sharp, restless, already mapping a life beyond Millbrook Hollow. She spent afternoons at the library, chasing scholarship applications like oxygen. They'd known each other since 3rd grade. Different worlds, same hallway. 2 weeks before he disappeared, Beau finally asked her to homecoming. He wrote the text 4 different ways, deleted every version, and just sent her a photo of 2 tickets instead. She said yes before he finished typing the follow-up explaining himself. That was the kind of ordinary happiness Millbrook Hollow ran on. Nobody thought to protect it. Terrence Voss had given Beau a ride home once, back in September, after his truck wouldn't start. Small talk. Voss mentioned he used to play ball too, a different school, a different life. Beau thanked him and forgot about it within the hour. It was the kind of forgettable kindness that fills small towns without asking to be remembered. The night everything changed, Beau texted Priya from practice. A joke about the coach. She wrote back a laughing emoji and told him to walk safe. Half kidding, the way everyone in Millbrook Hollow half joked about the bell. He never got the message. His phone was already cracked and dark on the passenger seat of his truck. Beau's truck sat empty outside the school lot. Keys still in the ignition. His mother called it in at 8:50 p.m., 40 minutes after he should have been home. Deputies found the truck first. Then his phone, one unsent text glowing on the screen. Did you hear that? Nobody knew what that meant yet. Search teams fanned out with flashlights and dogs. Clara volunteered before anyone asked twice. She'd babysat Beau on weekends. She wasn't going to sit at home. 3 hours along the creek bed. Nothing. Somewhere past 10, She found herself at the edge of the churchyard without remembering walking there, staring up at that steeple like it might finally answer something. It didn't. By midnight, no footprints past the third fence post. No sign of struggle, like the boy had stepped sideways out of the world. Around 11 p.m., a trucker on Route 9 swore he'd seen a boy matching Beau's description hitchhiking near the county line. Deputies broke off and burned an hour chasing it. A different teenager entirely. Embarrassed. Home safe the whole time. The false lead cost the search an hour. Worse, it planted a seed of doubt that would follow the case for days. Maybe he just ran. Clara didn't believe it. Boys who run take their keys. At 9:47 p.m., the exact time deputies later confirmed Beau's last cell ping near the church, the bell rang. For times. Alone, Walt found the tower door unlocked. He climbed the stairs half convinced he'd catch a prankster mid-act. Instead, a swinging rope, an empty room, and a hatch above the bell chamber wrenched open, a hatch that had been welded shut since spring. He didn't tell anyone what he felt standing there. He didn't have the words yet. Sheriff Renata Cole arrived the next morning, 2 years into a transfer she still hadn't fully adjusted to. She didn't believe in curses. She believed in evidence. She climbed the tower herself. The broken weld at the hatch wasn't rusted through. It was forced apart, from the inside. Scuff marks that didn't match Walt's boots. A single dark hair caught on a splinter. Wedged into a floorboard crack, a scrap of paper too brittle to unfold completely. One line survived, faded 19th century ink. If the bell rings and no one has pulled it, someone in this town owes a debt not yet paid. She bagged it and said nothing. Some things spread faster than the fear that caused them. A tip line call sent deputies to search a reclusive neighbor's property. They found a dead deer he'd been burying, not a body. Second dead end in 2 days. Word of both false leads spread by nightfall. Some people latched onto the runaway theory anyway. Others quietly doubled down on the old rule, pulling their kids' curfews even earlier, as if tightening a schedule could out-stubborn whatever was actually happening. Neither theory helped find Beau. Neither would help find Priya when her turn came. 3 days later, Priya Shah didn't come home from the library. Her friend Delaney had walked with her as far as the corner of Chapel and 3rd. She stopped walking. Delaney told Cole, still shaking. Said, "Do you hear that?" "I didn't hear anything." She said it again. Then she just walked toward the church. Delaney ran home instead. By the time she found the courage to tell her parents, Priya had been gone over an hour. The bell rang again that night. 6 times. 2 teenagers gone in a week. A bell ringing on a schedule too precise for coincidence. Cole felt something crawl up the back of her neck that had nothing to do with procedure. She went door to door on Chapel Street that night, asking a question she never expected to ask as a cop. Had anyone actually seen that bell move? Nobody had, but 3 neighbors mentioned a dark green pickup, older model, parked near the tree line behind the church on nights the bell rang. Contractors came and went from that property all the time. Nobody thought much of it. Nobody could give her a plate number, but it was the first thread that didn't smell like folklore. Church records turned up one entry that mattered. The original 1861 bell had been recast within 6 months of installation, after a laborer named Josiah Wren fell to his death during construction. No further explanation, just the cost. That was as far back as Cole needed to go. The fear was old. The danger wasn't. She confronted Walt that evening. She was right too. "There's something in the tower," Walt said, hands shaking around a coffee cup he never drank. "Not a ghost. Something real. I found it 8 years ago. Never told the board. A hidden crawl space behind a support column that looked structural but wasn't. Inside, a second chamber, no record of its purpose. And inside that, an old, hand-built pulley system rigged to the bell rope, triggered by a gravity-fed counterweight that could be set days in advance. Not a curse, a machine. Why hide it? There was a note taped inside," Walt said. "Fresh ink. It said if I dismantled it, more people would get hurt trying to understand why the bell stopped. I didn't know what that meant. I still don't." Cole thought she had her answer. She was wrong. The next 12 hours would prove it. Cole and Walt climbed the tower together that night to examine the mechanism up close. They expected fresh grease, fresh fingerprints, some sign it had been reset within the week. Instead, rust. Real rust, decades old. Seized gears that hadn't turned in years. A counterweight locked in place by corrosion so thick it would take a crowbar and an hour to free. Whoever built this thing, it hadn't rung this bell in a very long time. Cole stood there, flashlight trembling now in her own hand. Something, or someone, else had made that rope move. And whoever it was hadn't needed an old machine to do it. For a few terrible hours, suspicion swung toward Walt. He'd known about the chamber for years and said nothing. He had access any hour of the day. His own cousin had vanished near that church half a century earlier. Cole almost believed it, until she pulled the phone records. Walt's cell hadn't pinged near the tower on either night the bell rang. He'd been at his sister's house both times. Corroborated. Time-stamped. Solid. Whoever was ringing that bell wasn't Walt. But someone had a key. Walt remembered it then. The spare tower key, missing from the sexton's cabinet for nearly 2 weeks that year, before quietly reappearing on its hook, like it had never left. And 3 witnesses had already placed a dark green pickup near that tree line. Always gone by morning. Cole ran the plate a neighbor finally remembered half a digit of. It came back registered to a cousin of Terrence Voss, the quiet contractor, the forgettable one, the man who'd patched the gutters, hauled the supplies, given Beau a ride home once, and never crossed anyone's mind again. He wasn't hiding. He was waiting. The pieces reassembled into a different shape. This wasn't a century-old curse finally coming due. It wasn't even really about the bell. The bell was cover. Someone had studied this town's oldest fear closely enough to use it as a weapon. And he'd been close enough the whole time that nobody thought to look twice at his truck. Nobody guards against the man who fixes their gutters. Millbrook Hollow had spent a century and a half bracing itself against a bell. It never once thought to brace itself against a familiar face. Cole didn't wait for morning. She and 2 deputies searched the tower chamber fully that night. Behind the defunct pulley mechanism, behind a stained canvas tarp nobody had thought to move, they found a second structure entirely. A narrow shaft cut through old stone, descending below the tower's foundation. A rope ladder, far newer than anything else in that room, disappeared into the dark below it. Cole called down. A voice answered. Young, hoarse, alive. Priya. Cole climbed down first. She found Priya curled against a support beam, wrists raw from a zip tie worked loose hours earlier. Beau was in the next chamber, weak, blinking against the light, saying her name before anything else. I thought no one was coming, he said. They'd been held in connected root cellar tunnels beneath the church grounds, dug decades before the current building even stood. Both teenagers were dehydrated and terrified. Both told the same story. A man's voice through a narrow grate, never a face, telling them to stay quiet, that they'd be let go once the debt was settled, that the tunnel would collapse if they tried to climb out alone. Beau said the voice always came at the same time each night. Same clockwork rhythm as the bell itself. He didn't know that yet. He just knew to expect it. There was no debt. There never had been. There was just a man who found the town's fear more useful than its trust. Terrence Voss had discovered both the hidden mechanism and the old tunnels nearly a decade earlier, during a roof repair job nobody remembered clearly enough to question. He'd assumed at the time it was just some forgotten piece of church history. Nothing worth mentioning. It wasn't until he came back broke and desperate that he remembered it at all. He spent nearly 4 months preparing before he ever touched Beau Tanner. He mapped the tunnel's usable chambers. He timed how far sound carried up through the old stone. He studied who walked where and when. That Beau cut through the churchyard most nights after practice. That Priya's library route passed within 30 yards of the tower door. He picked his targets carefully, close enough to families with means, distant enough from each other that their disappearances wouldn't immediately connect. He never intended to hurt them, by his own account. Cole didn't put much stock in that, given what she'd seen in that tunnel. He intended to frighten a town that already knew how to be frightened, and let its own folklore do the work of keeping police looking the wrong way. It nearly worked. It would have worked if Cole had been the kind of investigator willing to let an old story answer questions that still needed real evidence. He'd underestimated exactly one thing: a sheriff who didn't believe in curses, and a sexton who finally stopped staying silent. Voss was arrested 2 days later at a motel 40 miles out. No incident, no struggle. Beau and Priya recovered fully in the weeks that followed. Priya went back to school within 3 weeks, quieter but firm about one thing. She wanted people remembering that she survived, not just that she disappeared. Beau took longer. He didn't rejoin the team that season. His mother said some nights he still woke up asking if he'd heard the bell, even from 3 streets away. Priya's father closed the pharmacy for a full week, something he'd never done, not for illness, not for a death in the family. He reopened only after Priya asked him to. She still keeps the 2 homecoming tickets, and used, tucked into the corner of her mirror. They went to a smaller dance the following spring instead. Nobody made a big deal of it. Nobody needed to. The tunnels were sealed. The mechanism was dismantled and photographed for the historical record. The tower got an actual lock, and at the county's insistence, a small camera above the hatch. Voss was charged with 2 counts of kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and extortion, along with charges tied to the falsified maintenance records he'd used for years to justify his unsupervised access to the tower. He pleaded not guilty, sat perfectly still at the defense table. The same forgettable stillness that had let him move through Millbrook Hollow for years without anyone asking a single hard question. Millbrook Hollow exhaled for the first time in a generation. Walt rang the bell himself the following Sunday morning. 8 sharp, same as always. His hand steady on the rope for the first time in weeks. Half the town gathered outside just to hear it, just to prove to themselves it could still be an ordinary sound. Here's the part that never made it into Sheriff Cole's official report. 6 days after Voss's arrest, mechanism gone, tunnel sealed, new lock and camera in place, the bell rang again. Once, at 9:47 p.m., the camera caught the tower interior perfectly. Empty, rope hanging still in every frame the entire time. And yet 3 neighbors on Chapel Street swear they heard it ring. Same time, same night, clear as a bell. Cole drove to the church herself, expecting a prank. Door still bolted, hatch seal undisturbed. Dust settled evenly across the floorboards, exactly as the engineers had left it days earlier. Nothing had been touched. Nothing could have been touched. She pulled Voss's holding cell log out of habit more than suspicion. He'd been in county custody the entire evening, accounted for down to the minute. Whatever rang that night, it wasn't him, and it wasn't his machine. Walt still checks the tower every morning. He says the hatch has never opened on its own again. But he also says, quietly, to anyone who asks, some nights the wind off the ridge sounds almost like something moving beneath the floor of that 160-year-old church. Somewhere under a foundation stone laid the same year a man died, and a bell was replaced for reasons nobody ever fully explained. There's one more detail Cole only mentions if you ask her directly, and even then, only once. The engineers who sealed the tunnels found a second passage branching off the one Voss had used. Older still, its entrance blocked by a rockfall no living person in town remembers happening. Ground-penetrating radar traced it another 60 feet beyond the collapse, running in a straight line toward the exact spot beneath the tower where that brittle 19th century note had been wedged between the floorboards. Nobody has excavated it. The footage has never been explained. So here's the question Millbrook Hollow still can't answer. If the camera saw nothing, if the rope never moved, if the one man responsible was locked in a cell 40 miles away, what exactly did 3 neighbors hear ring at 9:47 that night? And if it wasn't Voss, and it wasn't the old machine, who or what was left to ring it?